not quite get what our train of thought and what I understand Paul to be going through in this particular section, but the Corinthians had determined to send relief to the needy saints in Jerusalem. They had made a promise to do so. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 5 points that out. But after a year had passed, they still hadn't got their contribution ready. And so they needed to complete this pledge or this promise. And so Paul writes to them this second letter. And at this particular section, he mentions that. He brings that up. And he informs the church there that he's sending Titus, a trusted companion and fellow worker, as he mentions a little later in the chapter, for them to go and help the Corinthians complete, and he said, this grace in them also. He's referring there to the fact that the Macedonians had already gotten up their collection. Those churches were on the ball and had already done what the Corinthians needed to do. And it looks like Titus was instrumental in helping the Corinthians get this pledge and promise going, because he says, I want you to complete what you started, what you have started in them. See, so it looks like Titus was instrumental in encouraging them to get all this going. But what we see, even though there does seem to be some neglect in this, in other words, a lot of time had passed and the contribution was not ready. That's a fact. See, they had promised it, but it wasn't ready because he sent these guys to get it ready. And so, although there's a little problem, what we see here is a little different approach, technique, if you will. Paul doesn't use this strong authority that he has from God. He has at times, you remember in the first letter, he would write and say, how dare you go to law before the unjust? See, he used sharpness there. And he would say, and why do you not rather suffer wrong? And he said, no, you do wrong. See, and you sin against your brother. See, sharpness. We don't see that here. In this second letter, this group looked like had changed from some of those ways. Looked like they had repented. It doesn't detail all that they repented of, but we do see good indications that they were moving in the right direction, because in this section, Paul says, but as you abound, at verse 7, in everything, see, as you abound. Now, they had not abounded. They hadn't withdrawn. They had not done a lot of things that they needed to do. Matter of fact, when you start fooling around with the Lord's Supper, not even breaking it properly, how off track can you be that you can't really assemble and break bread right? See, so they had all kind of issues, and they sitting here worshiping with a fornicator that they had not taken care of. See, so they weren't on, they were not. But here when he writes, though, he says, as you abound in all these areas, and he says in all diligence. See? And of course, we know in this letter, in the last chapter, he says, he was thankful that they had repented, and he said that what diligence, see, this sorrow worked in you. So they had really gotten going looks like in some of these areas. So that's kind of the background. But he uses, as we say, honey, not vinegar, right, Dave? See, here, because what he does is he commends them. He tells them, I got a lot of confidence in y'all in everything. He says that at verse 16 of chapter 7. Therefore, I rejoice that I have confidence in you in everything, he would say. And then, and he says, now, and I'm speaking not by commandment. He says, but I'm going to test the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. And so he names these others. He's already broke down for them. The Macedonians was in a deep poverty. They got up a good, strong collection. He mentions Jesus Christ. He says, and verse 8, verse 9, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. See, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might be made rich. See, and that would be enough, wouldn't it, to get any of us, if we were thinking right, when we heard the words Jesus Christ and all the fact that he laid it on the line for us, what he did for us, that ought to get the feet moving. That's enough to get everybody moving. It ought to be. But he doesn't stop there. He mentioned some others, and we're going to talk about these gentlemen here today, Lord willing, and get through this chapter, I think, pretty much with ease, hopefully, unless we have some great comments and all this good stuff, and we'll be fine with that as well. But be that as it may, but Paul gives them some advice in verse 10. Now he says it's to your advantage to get this done. You see the tone, and I mention this because maybe this is one of the stronger, more mature lessons that we can gather from this section. And that is that we can still be encouraged if we can determine that people are determined to do what's right, even if they've had some issues in the past. That we don't have to give up on people. And if they off on a point or two, and they still off on some points. We hadn't got there yet, but they had not got this contribution up. Shane pointed out to us, they really hadn't opened their hearts up to Paul like they ought to have. But now that would be understandable. You remember when he wrote to them early on, he said, there's divisions among y'all. Chloe's household had reported it to him, but he said, I couldn't speak to you as to spiritual, he says, because you're still carnal. And he mentioned they had envy and strife, see, and those kind of things still working in their lives. And he says, you're acting as mere men. See, just like you were before you obeyed the gospel. They're not like these new creatures that they should have been acting like. So you've got that dynamic playing. And then, see, he writes the second letter and he says, look, open your hearts to us. See, we've loved you. We've done all that we can for you. Open up to us. Shane broke that down. See, so they hadn't really gotten everything going and headed in the right direction, but they were indeed moving in the right direction. We can see the tone here. See, even over this collection, he's not speaking by commandment. He could, but he would not. And I think here he just chose to encourage his brethren, since he had good indication from Titus that they were wanting to do what's right, no question about it. Titus had done grown, fell in love with him, if you will, really appreciate the group there, what they stood for. He tells Paul, and so this letter has a little different tone. And Paul mentions throughout this chapter, I have great confidence in you. I have great confidence in you. I have confidence in you. And that's kind of the tone. And that's okay, isn't it? So if you know something's going on here, we need to straighten out. We need to get it straightened out, but that doesn't undo all that we're trying to do. I have full confidence in the group here, and I desire to want to do what's right. There's a problem, bring it up. Let's deal with it. But the point being, because there's a problem or something needs straightening out, is not indicative of where we are as a congregation and where the hearts of the brethren are necessarily. We see this is a very mature section of the Bible. Because some brethren throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a problem and they indict the whole church. Every brother, they ain't talked to all the brethren, but all the brethren is caught up in it somehow. See? And that's an immature, really silly way of looking at things. It's not educated by the scriptures, I know that much. Wherever it's coming from. It's not coming from a careful handling of God's word, not evil surmising, not lumping everybody into the same boat. Those kinds of immature thoughts. And so he tells them, if y'all are willing to give, see, God accepts what you got, not what you don't have. One of the greatest principles we can find in the scriptures is that this verse proves, see, in this giving, God doesn't expect us to give any more than we can. But what he does want, he mentions here, is an equality. Now, this equality, we talked in depth about it last week, but in effect, what it is, and now this is worldwide. To the picture, God wants worldwide equality. See, he wants the Corinthians, because they are well off, they doing fine, to help their brothers and sisters halfway across the world in Jerusalem. See? And Paul says, I'm not trying to put any undue burden on you. That's what he says. I don't mean that others, verse 13, should be eased and you burdened, but by equality, that now at this time your abundance may supply their lack. See? But you see, we're talking miles here. We're not talking about us helping each other right here. We want that equality too. We want to share, and we do share here. When others are in need and all that, the church here has been helpful in different ways towards each other. But this is a worldwide brotherhood equality. And the principle was laid down under the old covenant, because Paul points back to it. Now, it's not true because the old covenant said it. It's true because the new covenant said it. See, what was so back then don't make it so up here. But if an inspired writer points back there and says this right here is that, what we doing now, then now you got it. You got a principle under the old covenant brought forward into the new covenant. And that's what we see here, because Paul says, he who gathered much had nothing left, and he who gathered little had no lack. That's the equality he wanted. And he refers back to the fact that when the manna was out there, he told them, the men, to go gather up enough for each family. Y'all get 1 omer each. And they went out there. Some gathered much. Some gathered little, didn't gather enough. And when they got it there and separated it all out, guess what? Everybody had 1 omer. Equality. God took care of each saint. Each Jew had what they needed to eat. He provided for them from the Lord. And that's the equality that he's pointing to and referencing here. It applies today. We have what we doing for the brethren over, what's our little place that we're helping in Zimbabwe, is our responsibility. We got plenty, and we ought to help them. And that's what this chapter here is talking about. You know, you might say, how dare us to not take what the Lord has overly richly blessed us with and not share with folks whose crops won't grow, our brothers and sisters in Christ. So we meeting the needs of our brothers and sisters. This is the equality that the Lord is talking about right here in front of us. And this motivates, he's trying to motivate these brethren to get this collection up. Well, here's what he does. He brings up Titus. Now, he's mentioned the Macedonians. He's mentioned Jesus Christ. But then he tells them about, here's another person that's on the ball. See, I'm testing, he says, now I speak not by commandment, but I'm testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. So I believe him to be continuing this train of thought. That these brethren, these next 3 brethren he brings up, I believe is just nailing, as we say, the hammer down, the fact that here's people that are on the ball, and the Corinthians get this letter and they go, man, we got to get going. What in the world have we been doing for a year? That's the design. And so he mentions Titus. And if that's where we are, at verse 16, he says, but thanks be to God, who puts the same earnest care for you into the hearts of Titus, for he not only accepted the exhortation, but being more diligent, he went to you of his own accord, and we've sent with him, here's another brother, the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. And I'm going to stop there. So, Macedonians on the ball. Poor folks, helping poor folks. Jesus Christ, the Master, laying it all on the line, coming from heaven, from his throne on high. God comes down in the flesh to become poor, to live like one of us, to take on the form of his brothers, his brethren, those that would be a part of his congregation, his church, that he would head. So he puts on this weak, frail body, Jesus Christ. See? So the Corinthians would hear about this, and there you go. You see, so Paul mentions him, and now he mentions, here's a guy that had gone in tough times, worked among them. See, he was kind of their little private worker, if you will. I say that because Paul uses this expression. He says, if anyone, in verse 23 of chapter 8, if anyone inquires about Titus, he's my partner and fellow worker concerning you. And then say he would write to Timothy, write to the Philippians, and he brings up Timothy. That, Timothy really cares for y'all. And Paul said, I have no one like-minded who will care for y'all like Timothy. He said, all seek their own, but not Timothy. Timothy's concerned about y'all just like I am. See, so maybe it looks like Timothy worked with the Philippians real close. But be that as it may, Titus, they would know. Titus is who was sent there to get some of this mess straightened out. See, he brought the report back to Paul. And of course, Paul had urged, it seemed, I think it's the same occasion, in the end of chapter 16, Paul had urged Apollos, if you remember, now concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to go to y'all with the brethren. But he was quite unwilling at this time. He'll go when he has a convenient time. So this urging of brethren happened a good bit. But Apollos didn't go when Paul strongly urged him to go to the Corinthians. But Titus went. Brother.
He went of his own accord.
Yes.
There was a suggestion made. It looks like he went further. Went of his own accord.
Beyond, that's what I got in my notes. Went beyond the call of duty, didn't he? See? He's going to go back. I don't know if we can really, this is tough work. It's stressful to worship if attitudes ain't on at the highest, just perfect, isn't it? To be among brethren, and maybe somebody's looking at you cross-eyed, or 2 or 3 brethren might have a problem with you. Now they ain't talk to you about it, but they got problems with you. They won't halfway speak to you. They looking at you funny and acting funny. That ain't good, is it? We all know what that's like. I think every person in this building knows what that's like. See? So Titus is going back in here where folks' minds ain't on the right thing. He goes and has to dig through this adultery with a brother. Get him placed where he needs to be, delivered to Satan so you can help him. But that's hard work now because these brothers, they weren't ready to get rid of this brother. See, so Titus is digging in here, and how do you get the Lord's Supper straightened out? You go in there and just, say, look at here, brethren. You see, so he's having to dig through all these problems, Titus and them, these guys. That's who's on the ball here. Paul brings him up. Look, he was ready to come back to y'all. I was going to send him to get this collection up, and like Brother Rex pointed out, he says of Titus, but he'd already determined to go in his heart. See, that's love, isn't it? See, to go back among these brethren, to go look, we got to get this money up. You see, how is that going to go over? But you got brethren, good brethren like that. See, I'm sure we do here too, that would battle through in these kind of tough conditions to help brethren get things straightened out. Because it's not really a light matter to make a promise and you ain't come through on it. We don't need to minimize that. I've heard brethren teach this, and they talk like the Corinthians hadn't really done nothing at all. That everything just hunky-dory through there. But that ain't really what I'm reading. What I'm reading is an apostle who really loves this group. And he's taken extra pains to make sure that what he had bragged about and boasted to others, that be found true. See? Now, let's say Paul don't send Titus. That Paul just goes about his business. He got all other churches. He said, take care of all the churches. What comes up on me daily? So he ain't thinking about car rent. Well, what happens when Paul and them shows up through there and find them unprepared? He mentions that in the first few verses of chapter 9. See? So what he does, right, is here's a trusted brother that he can count on, but it ain't just that. He stacks the car. He gets a carload of diligent brothers to go through and get this collection up. You see, to get it ready, he says. Not just Titus. It looks like he sends a special brother, and look at him. At verse 18, now he sends Titus. Titus is coming on his own accord, and we've sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. See, we sent with him. And not only that, who was chosen also by the churches to travel with us with this gift. Now look at what's happening with this brother. He's picked by Paul now to go with Titus. The churches thought real highly of this brother. And they said, you the man to travel to make sure this money gets to where it's supposed to go. That's what Paul's saying right here. See, that's a triple brother. That's on the ball. The Apostle Paul got confidence in him. His praise by all the churches, but then the churches pick him as the man to get this, and it evidently was a lavish gift. My translation says a lavish gift, a large, liberal contribution, because it's coming from a bunch of churches, isn't it? It's a pile of resources here, and this is the man they picked to bring it. Well, when the Corinthians get this letter and you find out this brother's coming, he's with Titus. See, that's what Paul is doing. That would get the contribution flowing too, wouldn't it? You see, because these kind of people influence brethren for good. See, they really do. To follow behind these kind of brethren whose faith follow, these on the ball brethren will encourage and inspire others. And of course, that's what Paul had done. He'd bragged. Evidently, the Corinthians were that way initially in their willingness. But somewhere along the way, they had not got this contribution up. You see, somewhere that had waned, this initial willingness and excitement has not brought itself to fruition, the completion of it. See? The brethren at Antioch in Acts 11, it says, and the disciples determined, Agabus goes down, him and the prophets, Agabus says there's going to be a drought, and it says, and the disciples determined to send relief to the saints in Judea, and then it says, and this they did, and sent it. See, that's fruition. That's finishing up what you pledged, what you determined to do, and following through on it. They had not done that yet. And so Paul says, I'm going to test your love by others, by the diligence of others, people who have been on the ball. Because the Corinthians picked this brother too. He was chosen by the churches to help get this money to where it's supposed to go. So, Macedonians, Jesus Christ, Titus, and this faithful brother here. Dave, did I see your hand?
Yeah, it's okay. I'd like to read something here. Just footnote. I think ties in scope overall. It says the opportunity to give offers believers the chance to prove whether or not they have received what Christ gave in the gospel. The genuineness, the genuineness of Christ's love is clear on the cross. The genuineness of the believer's love should become clear in the collection. So there's an attitude there that you.
It is.
You mentioned it last week, but I thought that kind of tied in overall what we're talking
I
about.
think it does. And that's exactly what Paul is trying to do, because we don't get to say be warm and be filled, do we? And not give our brethren what they need. James says that, see. We don't get to say that and it stops right there. Oh, I wish, I hope that they can get something to eat over there. I feel so sorry for them little children. Now that's it. Are you willing? That may be a little willingness. It sounds like you trying to get something started. But if that stops right there, and like James says, that's like faith without works is dead. It's the same thing. To be talking about be warm and be filled, ain't nothing sincere about that, is it? See? Because John talks about that. See, if you look on your brother, see who's in need, and you don't give him the things that they need. See, now what kind of love is that? See, so a sincere, dedicated love. I'm testing the sincerity of your love. Now, none of us ought to be offended by that. We need to prove our love. Our love needs to be tested, evidently. I mean, we don't need to be allowed to just make promises and not follow through on things. And so I think that's a great lesson to learn here. But we all can learn from the diligence of these brethren, see. And let us learn to meet urgent needs at this congregation. Let's not take all day to get things done, see. And what I loved about the group here, we come forward. We got that mealy meal up in about a day, 2 days. We ready to get it off. Wasn't no hesitation on the part of the saints, just out of pockets, and we got that money up, doubled it, and still got some in the bank, ready for the next round. See, that didn't take long. It took us just a couple of days, you see. And that's all of it that's what we're talking about. And but a year has passed and their collection ain't up. See the problem? You see why these trusted brethren are being sent? Because this is going to look bad on them. He mentions that if Paul and them comes through and that contribution ain't ready. Because what are people going to say? What are they going to think about a group like this that's got plenty? See? And so here's the poor brethren traveling with Paul. He says he wasn't sure if they'd come, but he said, if some Macedonians come with me. See how that's going to look. The shame associated with that. These brethren were in a deep poverty and got up a collection, and now the Corinthians, it's on their backs to follow through, because looks like they was doing fine. They weren't in a deep poverty like the Macedonians. So you can imagine, see, the shame, and that's what Paul is trying to spare them this. See, this is what I mean, this love he has for them. He's trying to spare them this shame. He said, I'd be ashamed because I did the bragging. And then he says, but you be ashamed too. Brethren, come in among you and find out that it took you a year and you still ain't got the money ready. I bragged and told them Corinth was willing a year ago and then these brethren, right, the Macedonians heard that. And it inspired them to give. So you can see that would come full circle, and you show up, the Macedonians get here, and the brethren who inspired them had done fallen flat, wasn't even ready. You see, what kind of, see, that would be a shameful situation. Well, that's what we're talking about. Look at the love that Paul is showing them, see, by sending these brethren ahead of time. See, the test wasn't to trip them up. See, like Paul just going, I'd like for him to get it up, but he don't do nothing to help him get it up. See, now, is this not bringing brethren along, Rex? Is this not bringing brethren along? He sends these trusted men to come in here and help them get it ready. Little baby in it, little nurturing there, isn't it?
But there's another reason right here. It looks like he sent this trusted brother, but later on it tells you why he said he wants to provide things honest. They had confidence of the brother. Mm-hmm. And so Paul said, we want to make sure this is on the up and up. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows it. Mm-hmm. It's out in plain sight. Bill,
listen, that's where we're headed. Finish that up, Brother Rex. Bill had asked me to expound upon what you expounded on. Yeah. And so
I guess there seems to be the major reason for that. Other trusted brother. Mm-hmm. Everybody had confidence. We'll make sure everybody knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. Nothing underhanded.
No problems.
Everybody gets there to where it's supposed to be.
So you got a good, Bill, I believe, example here that the churches is showing confidence in this brother. And the confidence is they chose him to travel with this money, which says a lot about him, doesn't it? Says a lot about his character, his ability to get things done. See, which the Corinthians lacked at this juncture. See, I believe he's detailing these diligent brethren, because I don't think it's an accident that he talks about Titus not only accepted the exhortation, but being more diligent. He came. And then, though, he gonna send another brother. It's not just this brother Rex is talking about. Jump down with me, if you would. Verse 22 says, and we've sent with them our brother, watch this now, who we have often proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent. See, I don't believe for a second that he's not naming 5 sets of diligence. See, it's just too much. Like it's just too, that the theme here is get on the ball. See, that he's mentioning is a lot. He could see he ain't talking about their honesty. He's implying their honesty. What he's emphasizing is that these men take care of business. When they tell you something, they do it. See, that's who you send with the money, isn't it? So you don't send somebody that would reroute the funds. You don't send somebody that would figure, these needy saints over here, these orphans over here need some food too. And maybe he takes a little of these funds that was for the saints, which is what people suggest about the 13th verse of chapter 9, that, then you maybe just help them. Because they need help too. They need too. And so he's a trusted brother. I think I can speak for the church. And so I'm going to reroute the funds and maybe help out. There's some needs out here for non-Christians. That'd be dishonest is what that'd be. They done this. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order. See, these funds was for the saints. And you got to have brethren that won't reroute the funds, and you got to have brethren that'll make sure that things is above board. Now, how much money did the Corinthians get up? All right, now the Macedonians, okay, let's see. Thessalonica, you sent this. Okay, Berea, you sent this, and you sent this. And that money ought to match up. And then when they get it over here with the receipts and all, and then they deliver it to the elders over there, and you'd have a good system. That's how it ought to run. Brother George.
You can wait too long to help.
You sure can.
1 John 3.
Yeah, read that.
Verse 17. But whoso hath this world good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels, and passeth from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him?
Yeah.
Next verse. My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and truth.
That's it, ain't it?
Tell him you're going to help him and don't do him any good.
Don't help him. Don't put food on the table, does it? That's a good point. Appreciate you reading that. But that's really what it's all about, isn't it? These diligent brethren, Paul brings them up, but he don't emphasize, I'm sending some good, honest brethren with y'all now. He ain't emphasizing that. That's implied. The church has got a lot of confidence in them, but he talks about their diligence. And this third brother, see, he sends Titus, and then he says, and we've sent with him the brother. But then in verse 22, and we have sent with them our brother. So sent Titus, we sent with him, then we sent with them his third brother, who had, Paul said, he's proven diligent in many things. You see that? We've sent with them our brother, whom we have often proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent because of the great confidence we have in you. And so what he's saying here, right, isn't he? You know, this third brother we send in, he fired up about this because of what we said about y'all. That's what he's saying. He's really ready because he's even more diligent because of the confidence we have in y'all. See? So it's brother here ready to go take care of business because what Paul had said about these brethren. Boy, that's really on the ball, isn't it? Brother Rex.
I'm thinking, Paul, one time these same brothers didn't have much confidence at all. They was accusing themselves. This could be, hey, I want to make sure they really know me. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm all about. Everything above board. Mm-hmm.
No question. I really think, Rex, without question, that because see, chapter 10 is somewhat of a defense of his apostleship. See, the next chapter over, see, is really just what you were saying. There has been issues, and there were false apostles among them there. See. And in chapter 11, we read in detail about these brethren. And Paul is still shaky. He says, I fear lest somehow, see, as the serpent beguiled Eve, that y'all would fall, see, from the simplicity that is in Christ Jesus. See, he's still concerned, see. And so this act here really, when you got this letter, you would see, boy, Paul really, he ain't trying to show us up. He's trying to, gently want us to get this money up, and you'd hustle and get it up, get it ready, and good men like Titus and them in there, make sure everything, finances is in order. This is what y'all pledged. This is what y'all said y'all was going to give. See, they had made a promise a year earlier, and they got it up, and that brother, all of them could put their seal of approval on it. Everything's above board here. Providing for honest things. See? Now, if Paul was traveling with that money, the false apostles might, they might say, boy, Paul, y'all better watch Paul. And by the way, how much money did you take up, Paul? You see? And Paul's got all this funds and ain't no accounting. Nobody knows where the money, it's hard. So you'd want to take extra steps to make sure no shenanigans was going on. And that's what has happened here. With all these diligent brethren. Appreciate y'all's good participation and comments. We'll start with chapter 9, Lord willing, next week.